I think probably we would also all agree that one of the landmark trials that's changed the standard of care in the past year or so has been, first we saw PFS results from Pacific, and then in Toronto last September we saw the overall survival. And I wonder, Tiziana, if you could just briefly review the Pacific trial, and then we'll have a discussion about that. I know Corey has some thoughts about that.
Very good. So the Pacific trial looked at the question of using immunotherapy in the consolidation setting. So this was a phase 3 trial that looked at randomizing patients 2-to-1 to durvalumab, which is a PD-L1 inhibitor, versus placebo after completion of chemoradiation if patients did not have any evidence of progression. And so in that study, patients went on to receive durva versus placebo 1 to 42 days after completion of chemoradiation, and they received durvalumab every 2 weeks for a total of 12 months. And then similarly in the placebo arm, they received it every 2 weeks for 12 months. That was a positive study. The primary endpoint of progression-free survival, there was an 11-month advantage of durvalumab over placebo, and then subsequently we saw confirmation of that with the overall survival benefit. And then most recently we're going to be seeing the 3-year overall survival, which maintains that same benefit that we saw at the publication in the New England Journal of Medicine. So definitely practice changing. The treatment was very well tolerated. There weren't any major toxicities or increased signals.
No surprises.
No surprises.
Yeah. Kristen, your perspective as a radiation oncologist, and what you say to patients during the treatment and getting patients through and that sort of thing.
Sure. I think with the Pacific study, our management of our stage 3 patients requires more close coordination with the medical oncology and radiation oncology team. We need to make sure that we're managing side effects very well, especially at the critical last few weeks of treatment, such that those high-grade toxicities are resolved and they can get on immunotherapy, as was done in the Pacific trial. Of note, for the Pacific study, there was no radiation QA. Patients were registered after radiation was given. So it's impossible to really dive in and interrogate the dose that patients got in terms of lung dosimetry and whatnot. It is what it is. I'd like to have that data. We just don't.
Yeah.
Nor do
Corey,
we have. Nor do we have data on baseline PETs. I think at least in North America and probably most of Western Europe and East Asia, PET is part of the standard workup. We will frequently, even if we've had a baseline PET, we'll get PET as part of the simulation. So we'll know whether there might be occult metastatic disease that was not built into the trial. There's a certain amount of attrition that would have also occurred in this trial. Remember, the randomization occurred after the completion of chemoradiation, with 1 or 2 exceptions. The START trial that looked at a vaccine, virtually all other trials have generally looked at outcomes from the get-go, from the point that chemoradiation has started. So it's very hard to naturally compare the results of this trial to some of the older trials. That being said, and finally the control arm, even though the survival overall looks quite promising, the median PFS was actually quite short. It's about 5.6 months, and not that we do that much better, but it's typically 10 months, 11 months, 12 months, not half that. And we have data on sites of progression and the fact that it was lowered across the board, including the brain. We don't actually have data on patterns of failure or first sites of failure, which are hopefully going to be looked at. So I had a lot of reservations about this trial on that basis, but survival trumps everything, and the survival advantage is significant. It's clinically meaningful, and at 3 years it's holding up. And frankly, the control arm is doing as well or better than any other trial, and the median has not been reached at this point.